Welcome to the Mortal Realms, an Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies through the Endgate this episode are...
I'm Davy, and I like to think we're doing our part to pay the bone tithe when we go out for Wing Night. We're safe, right, guys?
Yeah,
we're good?
I think we're good.
Okay, cool.
I think we're good. I'm Paul, and one of the things that they didn't mention in this book that I thought was really cool about Katakros is he took over one of these underworlds where they live on the bottom side of the underworld. You know what they call themselves? The Ossiarch Bonereapers.
And I'm Aaron, and I did come up with a lot of bone puns earlier, but none of them were particularly humorous. But in this episode, we cover the lore of the Ossiarch Bonereapers Battletome. Get ready to hear a whole lot of bones, thugs, and hard armies. And if we have time after all that, we'll talk about those bone daddies.
All right, Vince.
That's pretty good. Bone thugs and harmony is Paul's thing, and I loved it. I loved it so very, very much. How are you tonight, gentlemen?
Absolutely great.
Oh, good. I'm glad to see it.
Delivered deadpan.
I was going to say, you guys can't tell, but he does have a smile on his face, audience. I believe it.
It's concealed behind this mustache I've been cultivating.
Sure. It's amazing how much of your face it covers, actually.
I'm also going to go with absolutely great.
What? You can't. He just said that.
I know, but I don't feel the need to one-up him.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough.
It's too easy.
It's too easy, right?
I'm terrified of being left out, so I too am absolutely great.
Wow.
We're all on the same page.
Please don't leave me behind, guys.
I'm sure if Eric was here, he would also be absolutely great.
Exactly.
Well. After that great event of his this past weekend, I'm sure he was absolutely great.
Nice transition.
Plunging Spires. It was a cool time. Warcry.
Tam.
Yep. Tam. A Mortal Realms production. Hey, what have you guys been up to lately? Tell me a story.
Well, my latest hobby has been working through assembling some of the warbands that have kind of fallen off on with Underworlds. And I provided my Cygor for that event, which made me think that I need to actually, so I went through the process of kind of pulling out those models. I think the last time we talked about this, I mentioned it too, but my brain got thinking about what kind of things I could do with the Bray Herds, Beastmen.
Yeah.
Beast of Chaos.
It writes itself, basically.
Yeah. So, got a little spark there, and just on that Underworlds grind, playing a lot of the classic Garrick's Reavers, finding a lot of... They're actually pretty good, I think.
Oldie but a goodie.
I know. What's old is new again.
Sure.
I don't know if I call them good. They're more chaotic.
That's true.
I mean,
order doesn't mean good, so chaos doesn't mean bad necessarily.
I do, as much as I'm enjoying them, and because I was a crazy person, and back in the early days of Shadespire, I bought a second box set so I could play 4-player, which now is totally unnecessary because I have so many, from the expansions and stuff. But I have a second set of Reavers models, and I've been thinking of doing that thing where you paint them up as the inspired versions of themselves.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be sweet.
And that made me think that you could bring them to something and have a display board that had they're standing on terrain with a wall, and then have it be able to rotate. And like on a Lazy Susan, comes around the other side, and then there's the blood-soaked side, and that's their inspired side.
That would be awesome.
I would give them Super Saiyan hair, even though I think a lot of them are bald.
The important guys have top knots. Okay. Targor, Garrick.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. What's more inspirational than that? I would make a Super Saiyan noise right now, but I don't want to wake up my kids. Paul, what have you been up to? I say that jokingly, but honestly, if there was anyone in your situation who would get some stuff done, it would be you. So
I actually bought basically all the terrain kits that GW has in production right now.
Oh, snap.
Strong Aaron move.
Yeah.
Are you stepping to me? You want to go?
Well, part of it was your fault, so you were to blame.
I get that a lot.
Yeah.
Just say you're welcome.
So I now have assembled 4 more Warcry full tables, basically.
Jeez Louise. Where were you this weekend?
I was working.
Oh.
my actual real one-day-a-week job. Yeah. So I've had a lot of fun putting together all the little kits, the buildings, the temple, even some of the mausoleum, and then just the little terrain bits that you scatter around as well.
Sure.
So I've been having a lot of fun looking at those, putting them together. taking mold lines off of them.
I like that you led with looking at them. Like that's the first thing that comes to mind to enjoy something. Yeah, and I'm just absorbing it. Yeah.
It's totally, and the thing I really enjoy about them is that they are super resilient. I guess with the old GW stuff, it was a lot thicker and a lot heavier, but it didn't go together as well. So I felt like it was a little fragile.
It did not.
But with this newer stuff, it's a little bit lighter, but it goes together super well. Mm-hmm. So I'm confident enough to let my kids play with them. So they have the Stormcast army, all the Stormcasts that I have collected throughout the years that I never intended to use in an army, I have now given to them to play with. And so they've been arranging the terrain and throwing stuff on it. And so they've been having a great time. So
I won't even let my kids look at this stuff, let alone play with it.
I mean, they've been touching it. They've been moving it, pushing it off the table. Oh, I mean, like, this is like your personal...
You're driving me crazy.
Sorry.
In fact, if you could leave, that would be ideal. You can hang out.
Door closes, .gif.
Slam. What have I been working on? I think, honestly, the same thing that I said last time. I was filing Warcry terrain as well.
It's funny. The last time we did a hobby, actually, we did a hobby hangout recently, which we haven't gotten a chance to do in a while, just on the Skype, which we should do with the listener base.
In fact, what are you guys doing right now? Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Enough with this. But my prediction was like, hey, Aaron, I can't see what you're doing. Is it filing mold lines?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like that's 40% of his hobby.
I can't tell if it's my least favorite thing to do or if painting. No, it must not be painting because I do file and I don't paint. So, like, I suppose it's my second least favorite thing to do. Yeah. But so you gotta do what you gotta do.
Do you use the GW mold line removal?
No, I just use a knife, actually, which is odd because I had to buy the mold line removal tool to realize how much I liked the knife. That actually it turned me off. I mean, it's fine. I mean, I own
Interesting.
it. But,
the tool didn't light my fire, but
I was just wondering if you could do it kind of nonchalantly because it wasn't sharp. But if you're
Paul,
using the knife,
I don't do anything nonchalantly. No, it's good for like long straight lines. Like I like the tool for it, and in fact, I'll switch and I'll take it out. But for any like nitpicky stuff, I get the knife all up in there.
I honestly just use the knife as well. It's just something that's kind of automatic for me. So
sure. Though the one thing is you don't have to change the blade on the tool. But then again, I don't change it on the knife either.
I was about to say.
Oh man, what a life. So yeah, the Dominion Sigmar stuff is what I want to do. I did just buy the one with the throne because you can't get that throne anywhere else. So I had to buy the throne piece, right?
Yep, of course.
Rules are rules.
So yeah, I don't make them. So
you kind of do, but you still have to follow them.
Not this version of me, anyways. But that's in the mail. It'll be here one day, and we'll fire that up.
Nice.
Yeah, that's about it. Cool. We've talked about how we're doing. We talked about all the things we've been up to, the awesome, cool things that we've been up to. Mm-hmm. Let's get to the meat of this. Wait, no.
There is
you can't even. No, but let's get to the story phase. Right.
We'll get to the marrow of
that's
the
even
story
better.
phase.
Yeah. Let's do it right now.
The story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the 9 realms.
Guys, I'm already having way more fun than when we do this remotely, just so you know. Cool. We don't have a little story blurb because this is a battle tome about the Bone Reapers. Mm-hmm. How scary is that? All right, so it's a brand new race. We haven't had one of these in a while.
Nope.
What do we think? I mean, it depends on how you define it, but Deepkin maybe were the last one?
Sure.
Is that sound right?
Nighthaunt?
Yeah.
I think Nighthaunt is along the same vein because we had the Reaper, and the Nighthaunt range was designed to go with the Reaper, and we had the Morghasts.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's that anchor, yeah.
And the Mortarks, and these were designed to look with them.
Touche. Yeah, okay.
That's fair.
I would go with that.
I don't want to continue this line of thinking, but does that mean then, like, the Gits, though, also apply? Because they had to... Whatever. I don't care. We're done. Yeah, so... almost...
No, because those are resculpts of existing models.
Oh, fair. So almost a brand new race, or as close to a new race as one can get. What an exciting time. What a time to be alive.
Super exciting time.
Super exciting.
Or not alive.
Well, touche.
As long as you don't have a bone tithe near you, I think we're doing pretty good.
Oh, guys, I didn't
tell you. If you have a bone tithe near you...
Did I not tell you that's how you get in here, is you're going to actually have to... give me a bone.
So that's why Eric's not here. Rendered him down.
But my girlfriend gave her a toe.
He had the best bones. Anyway, let's...
Okay. Toe? I can get you a toe.
Probably real easy. Hey, all right, so brand new. So this, folks may not know who we're even talking about. What's their deal? What's their story? What is this new race. And this is gonna be a new recurring thing for me now. I think I've touched on it before, but we're gonna do it again. I want you guys to give me your best one sentence off the cuff, because we did not prepare for this. One sentence description of the Ossiarch
Bonereapers.
Okay. See, now we're gonna lose a lot of our audience when you do that. Give me, and because that you pay the joke tithe and give me a one sentence description of these dudes.
These guys are girls. All right. Probably. So this race is basically a race of bone golems that are constructed by bone shaper magicians who allow them to exist and to have life and being through these gems that give them animus and power. And when they are killed, they can collect these gems and make more of them.
I don't think I heard a period in there. So, okay, yes, you did it in one sentence. Good job. David, give me your best shot.
It is a race of undead beings that have custom bodies made of bone and custom souls made of mixed up souls, blended souls.
All twisted together. I lied. Mine isn't off the cuff because I wrote it. Suckers. I wrote, I wanted to focus on this part. It is an elite fighting force of autonomous warriors made of magically constructed bone in the service of Nagash.
So you're saying they're G.I. Toe.
No, that is exactly what I was saying. How could you read between the lines like you did so well? So there's a lot of angles. There's a lot of facets to this army. Mm-hmm. Maybe a lot is a big word, but multiple at least. What are some components of this army that jumped out at you? I'll start for an example. I like the fact that what we're dealing with are forces of dead, but they're autonomous. They make it a point to call out the fact that these folks aren't the mindless sort of drones that are summoned, those shambling skeletons or zombies that necromancers raise, but rather they have autonomy. I'm going to use the word again, some semblance of free will, maybe not completely, but they are able to enact sort of their orders on their own gumption. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's different than what we've seen in a lot of other death factions. And so that's something that was interesting to me.
Spoiler alert, it's one of my favorite things about them. Mm-hmm. Like when you create an army, you want to be able to imbue it with your own character, when you're assembling your models, thinking of the backstory and all that sort of thing. We're a narrative podcast, right? So that's
what we keep telling ourselves.
Yeah. If we say it often enough. But if that's something you value, then that's great for these guys instead of it being, 98% of this army that I run, if it's 40K, if it's Tyranids or AOS, if it's, Death Rattle or whatever the case may be, where most of the army has no ability to have its own character. That's kind of a bummer. And these guys don't have that. So that's pretty fun. You can imagine them having personality, no matter at what level.
Sure. Yeah. Anything similar to that jump out at you guys?
What really jumped out to me is that they are created by these artisans, and these artisans are not a god. So this is a race that is created and formed from the soldiers themselves, from the army itself. So they're able to create their own identity, and these artists are able to create whatever functional form that they want to. There is some freedom there, and that actually makes me enjoy the identity of the army quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a new facet for Death as well. Mm-hmm. Another thing is that they are sort of, and I said it in my little blurb, but elite warriors. You also don't get that a lot from the Death side of things, which is to say that they are capable fighters and not necessarily cast as a sort of horde army, that shambling, mindless, just overwhelming numbers, but rather they are, handy with a blade, and then it's not just mindless hack and slash, but rather they are weapons, not smiths, but
masters.
Yeah, weapon masters, exactly. Yeah. And not just weapon masters, or anybody. If they have a catapult, they're snipers, and their cavalry is peerless, I guess, at least maybe in Shyish. So because of that, it also sort of turns what we know about Death on its head, because you don't get that a lot, at least on the lower echelons. I mean, your vampires, I guess, could be, but we don't really see much of them anymore. So
sure,
this really stands out.
Yeah, and I think they've also been cast as sort of a counterpoint to Stormcast, right? Like that comes up a bunch. They're forged out of different but similar in the sense that it takes souls and merges them together. Stormcaster is the one soul, but it is using souls as a raw material, basically.
Yeah.
And then creating sort of a super warrior out of that. And so that's an interesting sort of dichotomy to have existing in the mortal realms, and that is one of like prime conflicts between the Order Grand Alliance and the Death Grand Alliance. Is this soul wars that we've been in for a little while. So I enjoyed kind of where it sort of fleshed that out a bit, and it gave it a nice counterpoint.
Actually, very little flesh, though. I mean,
point taken.
I feel like there's also
appreciated.
There's also a comparison to be made with the Varangard, though, as well in Archaon, because we've got these. The Varangard are these huge mounted warriors, and we have these Liege Cavalos that are also again these huge mounted warriors. We have more of the Ever-Chosen, as it were, right? Like I think we're going to maybe see some mirroring of this army in Chaos as well, which to me is a really fun idea to have these pinnacle armies of Order with the Stormcast, of Death with the Ossiarchs, and with Chaos with the Ever-Chosen, right?
And Destruction with the Gits.
Yeah, exactly. The Gits. I mean, they are the pinnacle of destruction.
Sure. Spider Riders specifically.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, you've got the gigantic spider, which totally makes sense of the cavalry, and then
I get you. So I mean, I think we've pointed out, I guess, that some of these new facets and these new perspectives on death that like we haven't necessarily seen before. So this is what they are, and I think maybe we've alluded to it here and there. But I guess what do they do? Like, what motivates their actions besides killing fools left and right? Because that's what everybody does. But what are they after? What are their goals? Does anybody have any thoughts?
Well, the main narrative hook that's in the book that plays into their army terrain as well is this idea of a bone tithe. So a bone tithe is a tax that is weighed upon you by...
Me?
Yes, by everyone, basically. Gosh. By the Ossiarch Bonereapers. They show up and say, hey, we won't kill you if you just give us a certain percentage of bone. Every season, we'll come back and we'll collect it. We'll erect this beautiful plinth to remind you of how great we are. And if you put the bone there, everything is great. And if you don't, you're going to die. And that's their main story hook of how they have a motivation for this army and how they move forward.
Sure. Tell me, why do they want the bones?
They use the bone as the raw material to shape more warriors, right?
Sure.
So it is basically a factory where the resource is bones. The actual factory itself are these artisans that shape them into the warriors, and then they go out and fight. Their product is warriors.
Man.
Well, and it's not just warriors, right? Like, so they're kind of creating this greater realm of death, basically. Like the idea is to perform Nagash's grand vision of like a world of total unchanging, death, necrotopia.
I was gonna say, if you were to name it, what would you call it?
Yeah, necrotopia, aka like something that sounds like a weird fruit juice flavor or something like that.
This tastes like death. Yeah. It's pretty good though.
You call it necrotopia.
Full of antioxidants.
It talks about as a collect bone, they'll create an outpost, and it starts as like a purely military installation, and then they start having like civic institutions, so like Bone City Hall or whatever, and then aesthetic things, and it
normally City Hall bones you though, right?
So it's not just continuing the armies, but creating this necrotopia by actually building cities out of the bone as well.
Yeah, and so they're expanding, and so like what you as a city think, right? Well, I guess I'm just giving this nominal bone, but like you're just making them stronger and stronger to the point where they're gonna like conquer your area. Anyways, and I love the idea of like them being the sort of tax collectors, because this isn't the first time we've referenced Nagash as like a boring and accountant kind of guy.
Mhm.
And like, so what better way to sort of, enact his will on the world? He's like, no, it's all numbers. It's all spreadsheets. It's all, give me my allotted percentage.
I think we should call it what it is. The urbanization of the realm of death.
Oh, goodness.
Boo.
Oh, come on. It actually does work because it is urbanization, right? It is civilization coming out, taking over, setting out an outpost, making these roads. They
Taking
make
over
roads out of
civilization.
bone. They are taking over everything, and they are forming this complex tax system. They're forming this complex delivery system.
You thought gentrification was bad.
No,
Watch out.
urbanization is even worse.
Urbanization. Oh, goodness.
But that's actually a really interesting facet of this Battletome is that they're not just warriors. They're not just this force that goes out and kills everything. Their main motivation is to gain more of the resource. And if they kill everything, they have a ton of the resource momentarily. But long term, it's not great because they run out of the resource because they've killed all their supply. And the other interesting thing is they are really about building an empire. And when they have finished using bone to make more warriors, then they use bone to make these gorgeous edifices and fortresses and just like cities.
Terrain you'll never be able to buy.
Oh man, it's so beautiful. It's so pretty. And it's all over the Battletome and you can't buy it. Anyway. So that's a really
with
interesting...
enough money, you could buy anything. Like you could roll up to Warhammer World.
You
and get your hands
realize
on it.
Aaron's about to like fly over there, like knock on the door and
Shit.
be like, you understand, my rules say I have to have this.
Hey, yo, Johnson, hook a dude up.
So it is really the creation, the expansion of an empire of civilization. And it is an interesting counterpoint to Nagash's desire to have a whole realm of death where everything is monotonous and controlled. But in this incredible world-spanning civilization-building way. Because it is the normalization of the Ossiarchs throughout the Realm of Death.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because the Realm of Death itself is so varied because each underworld is just whatever somebody believed their underworld is going to be.
This isn't the first time we've heard Nagash talk about how he wants to make the world, death and sort of uniform and organized and, antithetical to sort of chaos, sort of generally.
Very
like the definitive
ordered.
of order. Yeah, exactly. But like, I guess I never really understood what that meant or had no concept of it because I think before these Bone Reapers existed, what is it? A bunch of ghosts flying around and like skeletons sort of.
Yeah,
much?
like a bunch of things that don't have their own sort of animating force.
Yeah, yeah. So like it seemed sort of like he had this concept, but he didn't have a way to like get it. Where like this sort of fills in that blank a little bit.
Does,
this book,
yeah.
like this is the method by which he accomplishes that goal.
The method of his madness.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if he's mad. I would say he's spot on. He's laser sharp. That dude.
He seems pretty angry.
Well, that doesn't mean you. Well, for literal madness. Then okay, fine. Speaking of Nagash, let's rewind it. Let's start at the very beginning. How did these dudes or dudettes even appear? Like, how did they start? Like, where did this even come from?
This is a super interesting origin story, as
I'll
it
be
were.
the
Prove
judge of
it.
that.
Yeah. So in the Age of Myth, Sigmar woke Nagash from his slumber, trapped in time or, whatever lost moments, whatever the cool thing was. And
Was he under a mountain at one point, or was that somebody else?
He was definitely under a mountain at one point.
Cool.
I don't know if he was under the mountain at this point or at a different point,
Sure.
but there was definitely a mountain on top of him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to break your.
no, it's fine. Nagash claims dominion over the entirety of Shyish, as you'd imagine he would.
Mm-hmm.
We actually get a few little tidbits in this book of like what Shyish looked like before the arrival of Nagash, and we know some of this stuff already. It was this place where it's all the underworlds that could exist. Any underworld that anybody imagines exists, basically, ish. Right? Like I think it may need like a certain quantity of people to believe in it or something for it to exist. But he arrives and predating Stormcast, where I talked earlier in this episode about the Bone Reapers versus Stormcast dichotomy. He starts designing this idea of Bone Reapers, and he starts designing them like Nagash is like a long game planner sort of guy. So he starts designing these and hiding them away, which there's some of them that he realized like, hey, this is going to totally freak out the rest of the Pantheon. So this is why I'm going to hide them. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's an interest. This is, I feel like one of the, well, not the first time because, they'll introduce factions into Age of Sigmar and it requires a little bit of retconning. But it doesn't feel like very much. And I think it's because the realms are so big and the beings involved are so big. Like there's these, we've talked about how there's room for so much hidden stuff in the realms, but there's room for actions and motivations and things that gods could have done. They're so powerful. They could have done these things that are not noticed and they can conceal them. And so this feels better as a retcon to me, than back in Warhammer Fantasy when it was like, oh, hey, guess what? Demigryphs.
We're just hiding in the forest.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's classic example, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not as jarring. This felt closer to that than some of the other things they've done in the past, but it worked for me. It's like, okay, that, I buy it. Yeah, like he's scheming.
And he's pretty uniquely equipped to do so, right? Because he was one of the folks who was actually helping Sigmar create the cities, as we've sort of talked about, in our previous episodes. And it was, I don't know if this is the first time it's been brought up or one of the first times where we talk about how like the skeletons, like the undead themselves were helping raise up these cities. And coincidentally, they're also digging like catacombs underneath them where we're hiding these armies. But like, there's no reason why that couldn't happen. Like, I mean, to Davy's point, definitely feasible, especially knowing like the scope at which Nagash sort of does his plans. Mm-hmm. I buy it as well.
Well, and I hate to bring up the same old trope again, but we have this unreliable...
No, you love it.
Spiders.
No, this unreliable narrator going on, right? In the old world, we have a very reliable narrator. Everybody knows what's going on because every faction is telling you exactly what's going on until the present moment, constantly. So when you try and fill it in, you have to go back and say, well, no, what we knew was the truth then wasn't the truth now. It's still the same time. It's still the same people. But there's this new thing that's in there. With Age of Sigmar, it's not the same, right? Sigmar is going to tell us a different story than Nagash is going to tell us, than anybody else is going to tell us, right? Like, Alarielle is going to have her own story. And it allows these different iterations, these secrets, to exist.
Secret.
Exactly. Without clashing with the identity of the main narrative that's going on, or the main forces as well. Right? They are so big, so vast. The Storm Vaults are a great example of, well, those make sense in this context. Of course, there would be some huge, vaults that would be storing unknown treasures.
Also a very similar beat to this, like, in terms of, like, hiding stuff under cities. In fact, Sigmar's like, wait a sec, man, you've been hiding armies under my cities? And Nagash is like, you were hiding. Okay, fine.
I will say the only thing that, I feel like sort of bucks your unreliable narrator sort of thing is like, if there was a book written more like a history book than this one, as far as Battletomes, like, I don't remember it like this. Yeah, this is very much written as then this happened, then this happened. There are not a lot of moments in this Battletome where they write, and nobody's sure. There's a few of them, and we'll probably bring some of them up as we go. But it reads very, very historical. It reads very much to me like a Warhammer Fantasy army book.
That's fair. Yeah.
In fact, I think oftentimes when books that we read, Battletome specifically, talk about the time of Age of Myth, you do get a lot of we don't really know where the Bad Moon came from or something like that. But this is sort of the opposite of that. Like, it is very definitive.
I remember reading the Tzeentch Battletome when that came out, and it said, there's rumors that Tzeentch knows where Slaanesh is hidden, or that he was instrumental in the Slaanesh getting captured, but we're not sure. It would kind of throw out these threads, and it wouldn't say like Tzeentch did this and that got Slaanesh captured. There are a lot more threads to pull on and kind of really let your imagination run wild, and I didn't find that as much here.
Not to go off topic, but I forget, was he instrumental in that?
It's been, so again, it's still ambiguous, but certainly in the Tzeentch Battletome, it is implied that he that Tzeentch is probably an id or whatever, but that Tzeentch provided the information or something subtly to create the circumstances for Slaanish's capture.
Cool. So, I mean, if we're hanging out in the Age of Myth, let's spend some time there. So, we talked about how Nagash got freed. He and Sigmar raising cities up left and right, building secret armies. He ends up using the tribes of Shyish to make these Bone Reapers. So like he's calling on the resources of Shyish. I feel like he's still sort of learning how he's creating these Bone Reapers, and he's making use of like a bunch of necromancers in the area, and they become sort of the spellcasters of the Bone Reapers. He calls on Archon the Black, and makes use of his Death Rattle armies, and that's where he's getting a lot of the raw materials for his Bone Reapers. And so, like, this is a time of like great, I don't want to say great expansion, but like he's really getting a lot of production out of this area, I guess, secretively, which is quite an accomplishment when you are literally dealing with other gods. So that's pretty impressive.
Well, and I think the Battletome made clear is that this is another grand plan that was happening in tandem with the Great Black Pyramid. And
he can have two plans at once?
I know. That's a lot.
So cool. Genius.
And they did actually state that, we'll get to it in the background of one of the main legions further on, but one of the main legions was actually stationed on that outer edge of the realm, protecting the skeletons that were bringing back this grave sand.
Yeah.
So they were active, but hidden.
Yeah.
So even though they weren't under cities, they're in a place where nobody could actually reach them. So they are active, but hidden in this time.
But it turns out it's not just the golden days of creating armies in secret. They don't last forever. Eventually, chaos comes knocking, and we transition to everyone's favorite age, the Age of Chaos. And this is where Nagash maybe has to put some of his plans on hold, on pause, perhaps, and has to sort of fight for his life or unlife in the realm of Shyish, as basically all hell sort of breaks loose. At some point, Archaon comes knocking on his door. There's a big fight there. He gets punched in the face. He has to go run and hide, etc., etc. If I understand correctly, his secret armies really don't come to his aid at this point. It's basically his traditional, I'll say, quote unquote, Legions of Nagash type armies that are sort of at his disposal as Mortarchs, etc., etc.
Yeah. There's a central figure that is coming right to the fore, and becomes part of this main narrative here. There's a whole background behind him, but that figure's name is Catacross. And Catacross is at this very important battle where Sigmar comes knocking to Nagash and is like, all right, Nagash, we got this pact, all right? We said we were going to defend the realms. And Nagash is like, oh, yeah, totally behind you, but I'm only defending my realm, right? I'm only defending Shyish. I'm not going to go help you go out.
He doesn't even say that. He just he does that.
Yeah.
Like
And so Sigmar comes and fights Catacross, who is the main general for the battle, for this force. And Sigmar manages to destroy him, but not completely. And his spirit is put into a storm vault and hidden away, unbeknownst to Nagash. And so this Catacross figure is like the pinnacle of the army, and really a lot of this story is based around him.
Yeah.
So I think it might behoove us to talk a little bit about where he came from and what his motivations are.
Is now the time to do so? All right, keep going. Well, then keep going. Ride that train.
So Catacross was a living general. He was someone who wanted to excel at war to the exception of everything else in his life.
Don't we all? Oh God.
We want to win tournaments. We want to do all that. I don't know if we want to excel at war, but whatever.
Same thing. One and the same.
One and the same. All right.
War
Fair.
gaming.
So
war, gaming.
He becomes this great general, excelling through the ranks. Nobody really likes him, but they can recognize his talent.
Game recognized game.
He starts to build up these new creations to allow him to become this amazing general, and is just going from town to town, conquering everything, becoming this like glorious hero of the empire, as it were. He is in Fleisch, I believe. Flights?
Yeah, he's in Gur, right?
Yeah, he's in the realm of Gur in the kingdom of flights, I believe
Something
it's called.
like that, yeah.
And he comes upon this pivotal battle where he's fighting against beastmen, and he's riding in this chariot. So kind of a Tomb Kings-esque, this flight of chariots is coming for this grand big battle. And it's an interesting story because the great general outruns the rest of his army and makes a critical tactical mistake and ends up facing this rampaging Gorgon face to face.
Yeah.
And is killed.
He stabs it in the heart first.
Yep.
Gorgon's gonna Gorgon.
Yep.
And he got chomped.
And that's where his story ends.
That's the end of it. All right, cool. Moving on.
No, so he ends up in Shyish, in the afterlife. So there are two different afterlives in here. There's Ossia, which is all about hard work, basically. Yeah. It's an afterlife dedicated to working hard.
My nightmare.
But his civilization also believes in another underworld, which happens to be just next door.
Necros. Doesn't sound very fun, but...
Yeah. There's an afterlife of Necros, which is another afterlife that his civilization believes in. And they are just like sipping wine and honey and eating grapes and living the life.
That's my jam.
Yeah, well, Aaron's just like shaking his head being like, oh, I want that right now.
Living the unlife, I guess.
Yeah.
But
so there is this interesting discussion where we actually have an afterlife very fully fleshed out here. And it kind of colors the civilization that came before it. But we're following the life, then unlife of this Catacross. So as Nagash starts taking over the underworlds, Catacross starts taking over Necros.
Yeah, we're Age of Myth right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, which interesting. There were Gorgons bopping around in the Age of Myth.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah.
Beast, so
I'm trying to harken back to the Beastmen book. Like, was it like Beastmen always existed?
Beastmen always existed.
Yeah.
Before humans were there, beastmen were there.
Sure. Is that what you're getting at? Like,
yeah.
And so
before the frank arrival of chaos, I think we've established that Age of Myth chaos was present.
Mm-hmm.
They just weren't going buck wild.
Sure. Yeah.
So Catacross takes over Necros and forms this massive empire. And
further protection.
Yeah. I mean, they need me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sacrifice your freedoms for some.
You deserve neither.
Allegory. All right.
And Nagash comes knocking. Well, not Nagash himself, but his forces. And Catacross is such a cunning general that he manages to forestall them for an entire month. Which, for Nagash, is big enough for him to be like, hey, I need to come figure out who this guy is.
The line was something like, he did so well that he caught Nagash's attention, and that was the end of that.
Well, and I love the idea that for like this timeless, infinite being, like, I'm not going to wait a month for this nonsense. Like, I'm going to clear this up right now.
Yeah. And so he invites Catacross to come talk to him. And Catacross is like, I can't win this, right? Like, he's the world's, the realm's most cunning general, but...
Okay, I take back what I said before. This is game recognized game.
Yeah, exactly. And so he walks up to Nagash and he's like, yo, Nagash, let me command your armies and you can have whatever you want. And Nagash is like,
anything you want.
All right, this sounds great. So Nagash sends him off to his bone shapers, and they remake him into this 12-foot tall demigod.
And he's packing.
He is packing heat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there we have the beginning of what we know as the Ossiarch Bonereapers, because Catacross becomes the pinnacle of the Bonereapers and starts gathering this army about him. So he starts taking over the rest of the realm of Shyish.
Gotcha.
He starts getting the Liege Cavalos and like all this kind of stuff going on. So now Catacross becomes the Mortarch of the Necropolis. And he starts gathering this force about him. And this is a new, stronger force because they are these Bonereapers. They are these multiple bodies of bone melded into fighters with gems inside of them that contain souls that allow them to have these independent thoughts and actions.
And speaking of independent thoughts, at this point, he's like, you know what? Like, I can't it's one thing to be the general. I need field commanders.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find the souls of the guys who worked for me when they were alive in Gur. I'm going to rip them out of the whatever cool underworlds they're in.
Yep.
And rather than just be like, hey, you can just be you, I'm going to blend them all up together. Just, like really commit to this whole Bone Reaper thing.
Yep.
And then I'm going to have my field generals made out of these guys, which is pretty cold, which is what this guy is all about.
Well, there is one exception. One of his generals is allowed to survive whole souled, as it were. Mm-hmm. But everyone else becomes part of this army. And as he has this unstoppable force, as it were, he starts just conquering all of Shyish.
In Nagash's name, right?
In Nagash's name, exactly. Yeah. They make these bone roads where they can travel along, and they make these necropolises.
Even crazier, not just bone roads, but bone bridges. From continent to continent, like continent spanning, or ocean spanning, I should say.
And it's like bridges. It talks about how like other civilizations be like, "Whoa, these bridges are so wild, man! This is so amazing." And they're like, "Hey, NBD, like this is just what we do.
Sure. Big deal. Like we're here. I want to get there, and I got a lot of bones. Like it just makes sense.
Yeah. Why? What else would I do?
Sure. Yeah. So he just starts spreading out from the Prime Innerlands. So what is not kind of talked about in this book, but what seems to be coming to the fore is that Nagash has conquered the Realm of Death, but through Katakros, not through Nagash personally, which is a new kind of spin on the narrative that we've had. Because it talks about how Nagash has consumed these underworlds.
Sure.
But it is through the force and the action of Katakros that they have been conquered and allow him to take them over.
You're right. It does fill in something that we knew to be true, but I guess we knew the what, but we didn't know the how.
The how. Sure, yeah.
Which just is surprising that like it was one of those things that I didn't realize I didn't know until like this book shares it with you. That's interesting.
And as he conquers more and more area, he gains more and more different kinds of warriors. He conquers this land of Equus, I believe it's called, and gains these incredible horse troops that he adds to his army. He has a study that he sits and thinks about.
Hey, me too.
And he comes up with the idea of the Mortek crawlers, which are these mobile catapults. He gains all of this knowledge of warfare and how to use his troops most effectively. And because they are semi-sentient, he can send them to a place and be like, I want you to do this thing. I'll be back in 100 years. I expect it to be done. Right? And if they fail, he takes those souls, rips them apart, and transfers them into other units. Right? So he's this
worse units oftentimes.
Yeah.
Well, this talks about there's no way to go up in the ranks.
Yeah.
There's only ways to go down in the ranks of the Bone Reapers.
Yeah, I think there's one
also in the Mortal Realms
where a general fails and he becomes the main animus for one of the stallions that the cavalry is riding. Yeah. So
and they make it a point to point out that like when they do this process, like you're still aware of what's going on, so like and you're raging inside this like what ends up being a pretty pissed horse.
But I mean, it even talks about like him putting his generals from Gur into different legions, and it talks about like, and there's a tiny screaming part of this one guy's like, "Oh, rough," like, but then another one appears to not be as perturbed about it. But so when your essence is split among all sorts of things, like it's pretty bummer, man.
Yeah. But if you've
also describes podcasting a little bit.
If you've seen the miniature, the interesting thing about this figure is that...
Which one?
The Katakros miniature. Okay. He is not this just imposing demigod that goes around rampaging, doing all kinds of things. He really is this battlefield commander where he has bodyguards and he has hangers-on and he has this presence almost like... He seems very much like an Age of Sigmar Napoleon or some type of like 17th century commander.
Yeah. Sidebar, one of my favorite kinds of models are these that are not like sprinting forward or swinging their sword or something like that. Like it just makes the world feel lived in. So, you were talking about like picking up the Caradhran Overlord's warband and there's a guy like reloading his minigun. Like that little kind of detail, like it makes the world feel more alive to me. So a figure like Katakros, where he's standing, there's someone reading a scroll to him and somebody who's like writing something down. Like that is, I love that. And that just makes it feel so much more alive to me, especially because, in our world, like it's not, the commanders are not running at the front of the, firing bullets and stuff like that. They're at the back making plans, and I buy that more when I see that in a commander model.
Yeah,
so. Like he's not even like wielding his weapons really. He's just sort of leaning on them and just hanging out.
So he basically conquers the majority of Shyish, and this is the time when Sigmar comes knocking and is like, "You've betrayed me, Nagash, and I'm going to make you pay." And so he comes to fight Catacross, and Catacross is like, I'll send my hangers on after you. I'm not going to have to deal with you. And Sigmar is just like, no. You're going to have to face me face to face. And he's like, fine. Picks up his knife. He's like, all right, fine. I'll actually have to kill you myself. And Sigmar's like, no. Galmaraz to the face. And he destroys him utterly. But his essence, his soul, cannot be destroyed. And so that's where he becomes buried in this storm vault. And Nagash, of course, was not there present when this happened. And so Nagash thinks that he's gone. So now he has these Ossiarch Bonereapers, but they have no leader. And Nagash does not trust anyone else to lead them.
So he's buried under cities and stuff. Or hanging out in Shyish anyways.
And that like continues the idea of Nagash being, really patient, really smart, but also really paranoid. Like I have this super elite fighting force, and there was someone I trusted to run it. I don't have that person anymore. And so let's bury that until I feel cool about it again.
Just, it's never happened. Just like bury it. I'm not going to talk about it with anybody. Like, it's going to go away. It'll be fine.
Tangentially related, you know how Nagash is always raging against the idea that, like, Sigmar's been stealing his souls, and that really bums him out. And so, like, I understand up until this point, like, why that was the case. I mean, like, knowing what I've known up until this point, why that makes... But knowing now, like, how much, like, the souls are sort of integral to this, like, secret army he's had, like, it really lends itself to, like, explaining why he was so bent out of shape about all these souls being stolen. Learn to talk, dude. It's not just like, I wanted to turn them into ghosts, like knowing what I know about Night Haunt, but no, like he literally needed to like funnel these into his fighting force, and they're getting snatched up left and right. So you justified, I suppose, on Nagash's
and I think you knew this is going to come up at some point during this Battletome, but again, this goes to my whole idea, crazy as it may be, that Nagash is the Lord of Undeath, not the Lord of Death.
Okay, here's the deal, Paul. I don't know if now's the time to bring it up. This book repeatedly refers to Nagash as the god of undeath. More than once, in fact. And I didn't want to say anything because I don't want to, like, admit that you were right. And I'm not sure, like, what does right even mean anymore? What is right and what is wrong? But, and I don't even have the line in front of me. I made it a point not to, like, focus on it because I just really couldn't deal with my own shortcomings. There might be something to your theory about him being the god of undeath.
Oh, man.
And not death. And that's all I'm going to say on the matter. Well, that's the end of it.
I will actually, at this point...
Can we Skype in Eric real quick? Like, can we get a good, 15 solid minutes of arguing about this?
See, he was cooler about it because he was at least willing to accept the possibility of Paul being right. And I wouldn't go that far.
Impossible.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna capitulate a little bit here.
Oh.
Because he starts out as the god of undeath. But over the course of this book, it becomes very evident that he is now the god of death.
Did we just switch sides?
Not through his own action, but through the action of Catacross. Because Catacross has claimed this for him, right?
Did we just have a breakthrough? Are you guys best friends?
Yup.
Did we just become best friends? And so now he has become the god of death because he owns all the power, right? He has drained all the magic from the outside of the realm down to the inside of that realm, to the nadir of Shyish. He has conquered all of the inner prime lands among everything else. There can be no other god of death at this point because he has all the power. So while he starts out as the god of undeath and he steals souls from these people who have earned their rightful afterlife, right? Like from a very elemental point of view, he now has consumed so many of them that there are more that belong to him than that belong to themselves. left in Shyish.
He's a hungry dude. He's a grown boy. All right, so I think that covers both our Age of Myth and our Age of Chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Let's fast forward to the Age of Sigmar. Lightning bolts, Stormcast, smashing people in the face with hammers.
Korg's Call.
Oh yeah, run! There's a pyramid, but oh no, it fell down.
Skaven.
No.
No.
But we can jump forward. So Nagash, because of the Stormcast fighting off the forces of chaos a little bit, Nagash is able to get his footing back. And in fact, those lands that he's lost in Shyish, he's able to reclaim a lot of them again, even without the aid of his Ossiarch Bonereapers, whether it's because he's got his giant pyramid, Shyish Nadir, Necroquake, what do they call it now? The something Optimar, Arcanum Optimar, the spells all over the place. He's got his
can I
Night Hunt
detour?
Please,
is that a term we already knew? Arcanum Optimar?
I think I read it once or twice before this specifically, but it's relatively new. It was never mentioned as part of like Soul Wars or anything. I think they introduced it maybe after the fact.
Or in Warhammer Live. It might have been something that's been talked about by Phil Kelly or...
This, and I've not been paying as close attention of late, but this is the first time I'd seen it.
Maybe in like Forbidden Powers, maybe the first time I saw it. Sense. Yeah, sure. Around that time. So he's able to gain some ground, and because of that, and the Necroquake, revealing the Stone Bots. This is all information we talked about before. We talked about it in our Forbidden Power episode. Rewind, 3 or 4 episodes back. Yep, do that. But it's revealed that the Storm Vault under Lake Lethis, the Midnight Tomb, is found, and so he's able to send Lady Olinder and her Night Haunt forces to crack that thing wide open. And she does that, also turning the Celestant Prime into dust or something. So that's pretty cool too. But the doors are thrown wide open, and the Catacross's essence, his soul, the sort of ethereal component that he has been sort of reduced to, flies off into space.
It goes into the Nadir and just like causes chaos.
Sure, which is the exact opposite. Chaos is what they've been fighting this whole time. That doesn't make any sense.
But I love that. So Nagash understands that Catacross is trapped in the Midnight Tomb. He knows that it's him. He hears his voice and he's like, that's Catacross. Catacross is not gone, right? But he doesn't go and take him back. He sends Lady Olinder, which is a super interesting, like, for a guy who's been super paranoid, to send one of his Mortarks to free another Mortark from the
And what is he doing at this point? Like, he already effed up the Necroquake, right?
Exactly.
Like, so got nothing else going on, or does he?
Yeah, so that's the question.
Are you implying 3 plans? That's impossible.
The soul of Catacross is spinning around the Nadir, and Nagash is able to tease him out and to rebuild him.
Hey, you're being so silly, man. Get up in here, nerd.
Hey, I got your nose.
Yeah. Such a teaser, Nagash.
And because of this, he is able to start having the confidence to rebuild this legion of the Ossiarch Bonereapers.
And I think some of them are still just hidden, like they're just buried, and like he's able to generalize his forces. That's not the word. That's not the word at all. Lead his forces as general.
I was literally trying to figure out what you were saying.
Yeah, and recapture those lands that may still need to be recaptured in Shyish. But that's not it. Like now that he's ahead of his forces, and like literally all of the Ossiarch Bonereapers are sort of able to be brought to bear on Nagash's enemies. Shyish is no longer enough. Maybe this is where you're going with it. But like they're maybe venturing off and heading off into different directions. And venturing off into new.
You might be angering other
realms. So that's interesting. We'll talk about that when we get to the subfaction. But additionally, why stop at the realms and why not head straight into the 8 points? Because Catacross is going to lead his.
Oh yeah, wild, right?
Yeah, he's going to lead his whatever the word is, Cast is probably the word. Cast in just gonna knock on Archaon's door, which is nuts to me.
Knocking on Archaon's door.
You're damn right.
Hey, yeah.
Oh my! How many dollars is that? Yeah. That's a lot of dollars.
We're so rich.
It was totally worth it, though.
Rich in dollars, but it was just a throwaway line at the end of all this timeline stuff. To think that that's a monumental location. Like that's Nagash taking the fight. I guess one of the few times that Nagash actually has taken the fight too. I think I'll say Chaos. He's been picking on Wussy Order folks all the time, like left and right. But yeah.
Well, but that's an interesting point that we had talked about is that it's a throwaway line, and in this history of Catacross, there are not a lot of throwaway lines. And it reads very much as a history book, as Davy was saying. So it's a really interesting and enticing detail at the end to really kind of draw us into what else could be going on here.
Yeah, and it's not just like, some random group of Bone Reapers. Right? It's literally the dude is rolling up on the 8 points, like the main hombre. So like, there's got to be something that comes from this. Like, to my mind, and I mean, maybe we'll talk about this later. For me, this is the most important part of the book, is the fact that like they're making an attempt on the 8 points. That's cool as heck. I'm into it. Cool. That's
instead of staves of sharpness, they might be fighting some slaves to darkness.
Yes. Yeah. The intro of whatever that show is that I don't watch. Cool. All right. So we have just described the history of the Bone Reapers. Basically brought us up to present day, right? Like this is we're all the way caught up. How neat is that? Let's take a step back then. So like they're
forward.
I know we're taking a lot of forward. Back. We're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But so that we're talking about how they're waging war, but I feel like we haven't really dove deep into like how they are structured and like what this army is actually made of and how they operate, beyond just sort of collecting bones, which is cool in and of itself. But given that they are sort of this elite fighting force, with a very clear hierarchy and a very clear chain of command, we can talk about sort of what the armies are composed of and who's doing the fighting for them. And given that it's a force of death, you better believe it's a very rigid
pyramid scheme.
Ooh, maybe it is in the form of, I didn't even think about that.
I support that.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So, like any good pyramid, Nagash is at the very top. He's at the top of all my pyramids, that's for sure. He's a very top-down management style. Off to the side is Arkan the Black, mainly just because he's our Nagash's second in command, just all the time, like just period, no matter what. But then after that, we can get to our Catacross guy. Mm-hmm. He's the Mortarch of the Necropolis. I don't know if we said it before, but I'm saying it again now. And that means that he's the Lord Commander or whatever of all our Bone Reapers. We talked about these folks. We covered them to death. What? Let's move on, because below them, it's a series of it's caste systems, right? Mm-hmm. Am I saying that right? So below them is a series of castes, sort of grouping the different, like forces together. And so, sort of when it comes to there's the leadership side of things, there's basically like 2 castes: the Emissarian caste, which is a religious order dedicated to the glorification of Nagash, as all religious orders ought to, and the Panoptic caste, which is basically the overseers of like the war legions. So you got your emissaries, which for the most part are like the soul managers, and then the Panoptic caste, which is basically your war leaders.
That's a cool call. I mean,
Sorry.
there's a what?
Soul managers just strikes me as super funny. I don't know why.
'Cause I'm a super funny guy.
Yeah, I mean everything he says. Panoptic is cool. Gold. Like there's this idea that Panopticon, like this prison that can see into every cell or whatever that in that prison.
I've never heard that word before.
Panopticon. It's a metal band, also, but
nice.
Yeah, I don't think they ever truly existed, but it's this idea, and you'll see it in some like sci-fi movies, but the idea of like one guard tower that can see into every single cell in the prison. Oh. So panoptic kind of refers to that, like pan, everything, optic, see.
Sure. Yeah, neat. See, there's a guy who knows his Greek. So those are your leadership, and we'll talk about like the different maybe units that make up that stuff later, but those are just sort of general terms. But then the towards the bottom of the pyramid is the movers and shakers, the doers of things. We've got a pre-ad caste, which is the basically battlefield specialists, which is to say it's a sort of catch-all for everybody who doesn't fit into the other case a little bit. But we've got giant bone constructs and war machines and other types of things that have a very specific use on the battle case. Nope, specific use case on the battlefield. There we go. The artisan caste are the builders, repairers, and artisans. And so generally, like in the book, we're talking about how like they raise cities and stuff like that. But on the battlefield, we're most concerned with those folks who are shaping bone and collecting bone, and doing all sorts of fun stuff with bones. Making shadow puppets with bones and pantomiming
bones, thugs, and hard armies.
And bone thugs and hard armies.
Full circle. Yeah. First circle.
Man, look at Catacross. He's a hard dude. Because he's ripped, is what I'm saying. So there's the Thorax cast, which that doesn't even, okay. That's basically your infantry troops, your sword and board dudes, and the Mornial cast. I don't know what that word comes from. Like, what's the origin of that one? They are the retainers and servants, which we don't really see a lot of actually, like, represented on the battlefield. I think it's probably some of what's his face's dudes, but
but we also they talk about how this is kind of a cool moment where they sometimes use the bird bones to make these like bird skeleton things. And one of the figures that's on Catacross's base is actually this like spy master who has all these little bone ravens,
he's super cool,
or grave grackles as I call them. And they fly around and like send messengers back and forth. So
yeah.
And they're on the crawlers as well. So
I didn't know that.
There's this whole kind of defined system of the retainers having some of the souls and like being able to have some of this autonomy. It's really interesting to me. So they're integral towards the actual informational distribution network.
Okay, important then that they have their own structure there. And then below all this, not even on the pyramid anymore, they're under sub-pyramid, is the Para cast. And these are
similar to Pariah, right?
Ooh, sure, that makes sense. They are the outcasts, the less than chattel, the exiles.
Tell me more. I want to know more.
That's all I know. No, it's basically, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we were talking about before, where if you can't move up in the system, but you can only move down. Yeah. If you've done so poorly, and you can do so poorly because you have autonomy, like you have, you are left to your own devices often.
There are stakes.
Yeah. You can fail, and maybe fail dramatically. And if that's the case, you are knocked down quite a few pegs, maybe all the pegs, to this pegs. Cast where you are. I mean, as far as the Bone Reapers are concerned, nothing. Like you're not useful. You're not part of the structure, the chain of command at all. But do they still keep them around? That's something I didn't quite understand. Like, how does that work?
I feel like they threw this out there and then did not expand on it very much.
Well, I'll read from the Battletome. A Bone Reaper who has been marked for extreme censure may be broken into his constituent parts and remade by the Mortisans as one of the Para. So they are definitely a thing that they make. Or, quote, shattered. That caste of Nagash Forsaken Exiles forms the outcast of the Ossiarch world, and are considered to be less than chattel by the upper echelons of their society. But they still exist. They are created, they are made, but we don't see them on the battlefield, but there's a really interesting possibility there for rebellion.
Don't leave us hanging. Yeah, tell me more. What are your possibilities?
For a legion of Ossiarch Bonereapers that are made up of these shattered, of these left behind. There's a really interesting possibility to me for me there. So, see,
that's the thing. These are all fun. I like reading the first battle tomes about some of some of these armies. I want to read the second battle. I want to read the second releases about a lot of this stuff. Like I like the foundational information. Like the first pass, the first wave of this stuff. But what comes next for every single one of them? Like what's the next Bone Reaper book? What's the next?
I'm super excited for the KO book.
Sure.
Right? Because the rumor has it it's supposed to be coming out in February.
Oh, absolutely.
And like, that is just like, I'm super excited for that.
I'm not saying, but it might be enough to drag me in because I was so excited about the background on those guys.
Yeah.
But like how they showed up on the table was just a super bummer.
Well, and being able to fix that or just like illustrate it in a different way.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a 2,000 point army as well that I just don't play because it doesn't work for the background, right?
Right.
I ran the Grunstock Gunhauler Wing.
Yeah.
It's a freaking formation in the book, and like it just didn't work because it's too expensive and blah, blah, blah.
Formation.
So,
formation. It's just, years and years from now, 10 years from now, what are the Bone Reapers like is what gets me excited about that. And now we're moving on. All right, cool. Guys, we've alluded to what makes up these casts. We talked about different units. I'm sure you guys have had your favorite units reading through this battle tome. I would love for you to tell me, and no one else, just me, your favorite your favorite units.
Covering up the mic right now.
Yeah, it's actually going to be...
Seriously? Those are garbage.
Rude.
Are you calling them para?
I'm calling them para. Para for the course. That's
for me, I enjoyed the Gothazar Harvesters the most. I knew you were going to take it. That's Paul is like slumping his shoulders in resignation. So these are constructs. They look cool as heck.
Yeah, they're probably my favorite looking unit. Yeah.
And so they go through and they it even talks about them embodying this duality of the Bone Reapers, where they are a destructive force, they're killing, but they also create. So and they have they'll put parts on their back. They have this basically a bin on their back where they stack up the pieces. They have these secondary and tertiary arms that are collecting things as they carve their way through the battlefield. Like, it's just a really fun, really inventive figure.
You have a weird definition of the word fun.
I completely agree with him, though.
Yeah, I mean, I really like something that where clearly that let their imagination kind of run wild and be like, what would be a cool thing to see? This would be a cool thing to see. And I agree with them.
On the same page. Yeah. Paul, give me your second favorite.
Well, I also really like the Mortek Crawler.
Okay.
Like, just the background, the idea behind it. That it's basically this just huge catapult that has a centipede's worth of legs.
Sure.
That allows it to be a stable firing platform even while it's moving.
Well, I'll tell you what I like about this as well, is that it talks about the individual crew members and how they have specialties, and they've been like formed for those specialties, and they're performing these tasks, which, like, you can look at that model and say, these are not just undead, automatons. They have, like, you can just look at that figure and say, this guy has free will. He's a spotter. He's up high.
Yep.
Like, I love it. Like, it communicates so much about the army. They've done a really good job with it.
Well, and the other thing is that it looks almost like something that the Grots would make, right? It's got a freaking wheel on it. It's got a ton of, like, it was like, if you took a bunch of squigs and you tied them to a thing and make them move forward, but it has this, like, graceful elegance to it. And like you said, you can see every figure and what that figure is doing and how that figure is performing their duty on the miniature. Like this, I know...
Duty.
I know that Catacross really tells the story of the general, but I feel like the Mortek Crawler really tells the story of the army. You can deduce what the whole army is supposed to be from this one miniature, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't seem coincidental that anything was placed there. There's a lot of thought put into the design of this. And it just looks super cool as far as I'm concerned. So,
well, and there's been none, but like it's rare to have like a war machine in AOS. Like, they don't make a lot of war machines anymore. Again, not none, just not a lot of them. So it's cool to see another war machine getting created, and like a unique creative way to create one. That's legit. Can I tell you guys my favorite one?
Only if you speak off mic.
I think I'm into the Necropolis Stalkers, and so what these dudes are like they're like giant constructs, bigger than your average bear. I mean, dude. So what they have is they've got 4 arms, like the Immortus guard. So they're sort of a dual kit there. But these guys have basically they're the attack giant constructs. They've got big giant blades, and they're holding them in 2 of their arms. That's how big these blades are. But I think what's cool about them is the fact that they're 4-headed to sort of represent the idea that they are made up of a bunch of different souls. And I think we've alluded, or we've talked generally about the idea that we're funneling souls into these creatures, but these folks really embody the idea that we're mixing and matching. We're trying to optimize the soul composition of these folks.
And not just the souls, but the body, right?
Yeah,
because it's creating this body. It's 4 arms, 2 legs. Like, it just doesn't exist otherwise, as far as we're aware. But yeah, I think as a whole, it really sort of embodies this concept of the Bone Reapers idea. It's like you're making this super form out of these raw materials.
Sure. It's almost an example of a greater than the sum of its parts situation, right? You'd like to think so anyways. Sure. And so what we don't necessarily get from this Battletome, but I think we've gotten from another story that I'm going to talk about later, but like just the balance of what it takes to have a bunch of souls, very capable, maybe very powerful souls, very just the idea that they are in perfect balance and being utilized in different ways, all in a singular form, but taking advantage of what they know.
Yeah.
It's the beauty of sort of that art form of like combining, not to overstate it, I guess that's maybe exaggerating a little bit, but the art form of combining these different components and making something better out of it. And so they are weapon masters. They are a sight to be seen on the battlefield, and they can utilize different tactics and styles and et cetera, et cetera. It really, in a way, kind of reminded me of the old Warhammer Fantasy Dryad situation where they could take different forms and have different benefits. Not that they've done it a few other times for different models, I think, since then, but I was always a Wood Elf player, so that always struck with me. So it's, I mean, in no way related, but the end result is the same, that they have different specialties, and they can take different styles, which I think is really legit. And like I said, it is no better. It's exemplified in no better way than it with these stalkers, that soul combining, that joining. And I think it's really, really, really cool. All right. So those are some of the units. We spent a lot of time talking about the special characters, the big ones, in the army, but not quite all of them. Nagash can be taken in this army. Arcane the Black can be taken, as well. And then obviously Catacross, who we've sort of gushed about, but there is a couple more as well. Does anybody want to talk about some of the other special characters? Just real quick.
So we have Archxanthos, who is, he is a mounted character. And he is what I alluded to before. He is the one general that Catacross was like, you're good enough for me to keep whole.
And gosh darn it, people like you.
Exactly. So he is basically the second in command, as it were, of the army. He sends him out to do all these things on his own, and he has not failed, obviously, right? Like, he hasn't been broken down to his constituent parts, so he is the loyal right hand of Catacross. Which...
Let's not forget, I mean, we'll gloss over the fact that he's kind of this xenophobic, anti-life, he wants to kill all the living in Shyish. That's fine. It's just a minor. We won't hold it against him.
So he's from Shyish, right? And he was there in his afterlife, and then these human tribes come in, and he's just like, "This is our realm. This is our place," right? And they come in and they mess everything up. So it is more of this disorder, right? Like, there is a way that things work, and to him, this is a disorder of what's going on. And so it is not necessarily that they are different. It is that they are not the same, right? He says the realm of the dead should be for the dead, which is, I think, actually a really interesting perspective for a place where you can live in eternity. So the thing about his character that strikes me as interesting is actually that he takes this idea that the realm of the dead is for the dead, but then flips it on his head and says, but I can tell you how to live that death. Right? That's where he becomes this kind of terrible character where he's willing to do anything to maintain the realm of death. Even if it means that he's ruining other people's afterlives for that purpose.
Yeah. It talks about him in his mortal life as an assassin mortician, which is a weird duality.
Yeah.
What's a mortician in this situation? Like, he's a
so he
funeral
has,
home guy? Like, what?
Well, he has some responsibility for preparing the dead for their transition.
Oh, and he buries
so he'd kill him. He would he'd find his living target, kill that target, but then he would have some obligation where okay, I'm gonna provide this now dead target of my assassination with a dignified burial. So it'd be a lot of hard labor, and he would sew up the body, sew up the wounds that it had received and that sort of thing. So it was this cool reverence for I've killed you, but I still have this respect for you. And he's actually ends up he's become so extreme that he's lost this, which I was a little bummed out when I got to that last paragraph. I was like, this guy was more interesting when he had that duality pulling him in two different directions. So.
Well, and it makes it. Didn't he had two focuses of his personality, and he lost the one, and the other one became hypersensitive. He became hyper focused on. There's not enough room for two interests. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is that Nagash trusts Catacross, right, to lead these Ossiarch Bonereapers.
Me too.
But Catacross trusted this guy, right? This Cavalos Xantos to lead his armies for him. But Nagash is like, I'm noping out of there, right? No, I only can have Catacross. He's my only guy. So Nagash could have had all of the Bonereapers this entire time, but instead he's chosen to bury them because the one guy that he thought was the right guy wasn't there. But then we move on to Vok Mortarion.
The master of the bone tithe. You've got a bone tithe. You got all these bones coming in. You got all the bones coming out. You've got accounts receivable, accounts payable. How are you going to keep track of all this? You need somebody to head up this department, and so you do. You've got this Vokmordian. So what he does is he's almost in a sense outside the hierarchy. I mean, he's still part of it, but like he has special dispensation from Nagash, to do his thing. And so he basically runs the show. Like, he can't be everywhere, obviously. He sends the Bone Reapers out as sort of his emissaries to, like, do the collecting and stuff like that. But, like...
He goes out himself. He's the emissary.
Every single time.
I think that's basically it. I mean, he just makes people coughing it up all over the place.
You just want... How long were you holding on to that one?
A little bit.
You monster. Jeez Louise. But yeah, so he's walking around. He's got a big old, coffin on his... Or, like... Yeah, coffin on his back. Why? Why is that necessary, dude? Just set it down. Like, you don't have to hold that thing. But he's in charge of the bone tithe. He's also the special character that comes in the Feast of Bones set. So for a stretch of time there, he in this city of Shyish, he was butting heads against a bunch of ogres. But that's a different book, and we don't have to talk about it here. So
the one thing I noticed about this guy that I appreciated, dating all the way back to, I think it really came to the fore during the end times. It felt like the first place that I really saw death aligned in opposition to Nurgle specifically. Death being this stagnation, everything is become like this total steady state, versus Nurgle, which is this constant cycle. So you have this Tithe Master, right? Like, who's keeping careful accounts of all that goes. Well, Nurgle has the Spoilpox Scrivener who keep tracks of the diseases and how many people have did it. Like, that's been something that's kind of been carried along in Nurgle. So that is again like two sides of the same coin that we saw earlier, but this time it's chaos and death, right? So I noticed that sort of relationship there.
Yeah, and it's very rare to see the non-order factions sort of not arrayed against each other, but like compared and contrasted against each other. And so like any example of that, I think is fun to see. And like there should be plenty of them. There's no reason why they can't be contrasted against each other. Yeah. So handful of special characters if you're going to consider Arcan and Nagash part of that. So it's nice to see. It's nice to add these sort of specific perspectives isn't the word, but sort of touchstones to the army that we're dealing with. In an army that should be chock full of, different personalities, because again, in Death, despite being in Death, this is not a mindless, faceless army. So I imagine we'll see more in the future as well. Speaking of uniqueness, it turns out, like any good new army, it has its fair share of sub-factions as well, so with their own unique traits and ways of doing business. Did you guys have any favorite sub-factions? You better. Lord help me.
I did.
I'm going to collect a tithe from you of cool sub-factions.
So I really like the Null Myriad. And for me, a term that I just may not have been paying attention to, but the Perimeter Inimical.
This might have been the first time I've seen it. I can't remember.
I agree.
Yeah. So Paul talked about them earlier and got me nervous because I thought I was going to say too much about them. But this was the Legion that was created, and they're one of the first created, and it was this quirk of how they were created, that they had this resistance to magic. And it meant that they were really good for existing on the very edge of the realm. And in most realms, that's where the chaotic energy is at. Ever since the Necroquake and the creation of the Black Pyramid and the Nadir of Shyish, like that's kind of reversed that for them. But this idea that he needed somebody to protect the edges of his realm while this endless legion of Archon, the Blacks, Death Rattle Warrior is carrying a single grain of gravesand back to form the Black Pyramid. And it talked about them, being resistant to these surges and these crazy, like, primordial monsters that existed at the edge. Like, it was so I'm picking these guys because they informed us a little bit more about the existence of, like, what the realms look like. We learned a little bit about it in the Pantheon short story. But ever since the Nadir of Shyish was created, all of a sudden it's not so chaotic at the edge of the realm of Shyish. And so now he's got, now I've got a legion that is specifically made to exist at this perimeter inimical, which exists in all these other realms. I can deploy them there. Mm-hmm. They can exist and fight in that area where other armies are going to have a lot of difficulty. I can start to control the edges of these other realms, and if I can do that, then I can disrupt the flow of that magic, which is fundamental to that realm. So these feel like it feels like a sub-faction that is interesting because it tells us a little bit more about the Age of Sigmar as a whole, and it feels really pivotal. Like they could play this role that could drastically change things if you can somehow disrupt the flow of magic in another realm. Like that's a big
they're important. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, are they the fact that they were able to resist the magic is it because they were made from some of the skeletons that were carrying the gravesand itself, right?
Exactly.
So like because of that. So I like the idea that like we're hearkening back to that previous lore blurb from previous, stories or, books or things like that. And we're using it. We're moving it. This is a prime example of this thing existed and now I'm moving forward and I'm making a new thing out of it. Like you don't get that all the time, from the stories that we read. And so I would love to see more examples of that, of a thing and then having it evolve into the next thing, which is really cool.
Well, and it's a progression of the story of two plans that were happening at the same time with what happens when the plans are done. Mm-hmm. Right, like, because the Nadir is done, so now he's doing this. And they also talked about how Archon took the necromancers that were helping him to make this happen and pulled them apart and made them into the Soul Masons and the Soul Reapers of his Bone Reapers, because Archon has his own legion of Ossiarch Bonereapers that he is allowed to command because he gave the skeletons from the Nadir of Shyish to the Ossiarch Bonereapers. And then they're like, oh, well, you gave us these guys, which are super cool, and they can resist magic. Well, we'll just give you your own legion, right? So he has his own legion that he can run around with. So that's a cool, just like three-way story hook that blends together and makes a nice narrative and moves the story forward.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really interesting about that is that every other time that we've talked about the Edge of the Realm, it's basically been talked about as it's so saturated with magic that nothing can live there. But in here, it's not so saturated with magic that nothing can live there. Obviously, the Ossiarch Bonereapers are there. Obviously, the skeletons are going back and forth. But there are things that the Ossiarchs need to defend the skeletons against. There are other life forms that exist in this periphery of the realms, which is a new fact, right, that we have about the realms, which is super interesting to me. Because what would beings that can exist in total saturation of magic be? Mm-hmm. Because even Tzeentch can't exist there because he, you have to have some mind. So what are these primordial things? That's super interesting.
Intimidating at the very least, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, then in that case, I'm going to tell you about the Ivory Host. Here's the deal. I feel like we've been spending a lot of time in Shyish in this book. But let's branch out. That'd be more like life. Let's teeth out. That doesn't make any sense. Let's go expand
our own trail.
Yeah, let's expand our horizons into Gur. So, we sort of alluded to it early in the episode that now that our bone reapers they're a well-oiled machine right now. They're collecting bones in Shyish. Shyish, for the most part, is being overtaken by Nagash. We're not at a point where Nagash then has his sights on other realms, and so he sends this Ivory Host out to the realm of Gur. And so they form a beachhead. They actually have a bunch of ships, and so they're sailing seas left and right. And what they do is they're going through and taking down not only civilizations, but then also the large like beasts, the large predators that exist in this realm, and taking, defeating the beast, but then also clearing sort of the area around the beast so that they can sort of tame that section of the wilds and remake it in the Shyish image. While they're taking down these monstrous beasts and taking their tusks and bones and teeth and et cetera, they're obviously repurposing that bone, as they are wont to do, back into themselves and replenishing their forces or creating new forces, which would make sense. That's where they do everywhere else. They actually make it a point to call out the fact that these folks are, despite being in the realm of beasts, are actually pretty pristine and pretty clean and pretty artistic. They have a certain level of civilization about them that maybe stands out amongst all the other sub-factions as well. They are very a civilized bunch, bringing sort of civilization to the realm of beasts. However, the most interesting part, if that was boring, let me catch your attention here, is the fact that now that they're bringing in these bestial bones into themselves and taking them into their their physical structure, it turns out that things aren't as civilized as you might expect, and the very like raw, Gurian, I guess is the word, magic or nature of these bones is starting to affect the temperament and personalities of these bone reapers. And actually, if things get too hot and heavy, or if like their bones end up getting broken and like the essence gets released from inside them, things go hog wild. And I literally mean hog wild, in that like they go wild like beasts, and they become completely savage and wild and sort of out of control, due to the Gurian nature of the bones that they've been sort of shaping into their bodies. So it's a very Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation, which, I mean, how cool is that? Obviously, that's super neat, and I like how they made it a point to incorporate some realm essence into this force. All the other ones, for the most part, generally are Shyish or at least general.
I mean, you have the crematorians, which has this actually element to them, but I appreciate that. So we've seen a lot of battle tomes that were like, here's what this, and I like this, but here's what this faction looks like if it is existing in this realm, and here's what it looks like if it's existing in this realm, and they did some of that with this, like here's what a Gur Legion would look like, but they didn't feel obliged to like, okay, I guess we're going to check off every
single box.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a cool way. Like I like that they explored different ways to make them unique rather than just be like, this is the realm of metal one,
out of sort of some sort of obligation.
Sure.
Instead, they found a cool idea and they stuck with the cool idea. So I'm into it. I want to see more of it, but not every box of it.
I like the Petrifex Elite. They were underground for the vast majority of this time, so they basically turned to stone. Their bone is just super hard, but they're called the Archeasians, which is a super cool name to begin with. But the interesting thing to me isn't necessarily that background, is that they basically have become a cult, whereas everything is determined by an individuality and they're able to make their own decisions. They are led by one called the Grand Necromystic. And they eschew individuality to the point where no one has a name. They're all existing basically by titles. Yeah. And it's just kind of cool because to me it reminds me of the mortuary cult from the old world, right? Like they basically have this new version of this cult where they are going around spreading death, and they're destroyed but recreated almost as if this is Undying Legion, right? Like, so it just seems super cool to me, because yeah,
sure, and they're made of stone. Like that's cool. They're literally like
cool.
petrified bone. I'm into them.
Yeah, they ambush people by standing still, and people think they're statues, and then they're like,
yeah, surprise!
Yeah,
mother trucker. Really cool and very similar, not similar, but like harkens back to like Chumking statues, kind of a little bit, like literally.
It's very much like Ushabti.
Yeah, if they're constructs and they're statues, and they're,
and then they come to life.
Mm-hmm. I'm down. I'm here for that. Cool. Any other thoughts on subfactions, or we can offer any other general thoughts about the book?
No. Well, I will say one subfaction that had just like a comment that interested me was the crematorians. this idea of this legion that has this burning within them, and they're like, if they don't get there fast enough, they're going to end up burning up, and they have this vengeance where if they are like they're embodying Nagash's idea of like he hates life so much that they'll lash out in death / second death / whatever. But the leader of that legion has this individuality enough where as they're coming to places, he says like, hold on, like there's this library here, this repository of knowledge. I want to kind of, before you burn this down, I'm going to read all the stuff in here real quick, see if I can find a cure for the curse for my legion. And it talks about like he has something approaching a spark of hope inside him. And I thought that was a really fun idea. I liked it. I liked it for that. And I liked it for the what it provides you as somebody that might be making their own army of like, here's like a sort of uncharacteristic emotion or defining characteristic of a leader of one of these Bone Reaper armies. So I that going back to one of the things I like most about this army as a whole is the fact that they have individuality. Yeah. That was that personified.
Well, how rare is it that like Nagash gives a group of people something and they're like, no, I don't want this. Like, I don't want, like, please, like, and they're trying to find a way to get away from it. Which is rare.
Well, and like his story, right? Like to me, I want to read about that. Like I would love to have a story about him and his life, because the way that these guys are constructed allows them to be individuals and have individual wants and needs, but yet against this like impending doom that they still have to be excellent at what they are called to do. But if they are excellent at what they are called to do, they can continue to have as many like personal quirks as they want to, because they are made up of all these different people, right? Like, they're like, I'm going to take this thing from this thing, and this thing from this thing, and this thing from this thing, and then I'll make the perfect warrior. Like, that never works perfectly, right? There's going to be this thing from that guy that you were like, oh, I thought that was part of here, but actually it's over here, right? And this story illustrates something like, well, nobody intended for him to have this, like, thirst for knowledge, right? That's not what was intended when they built this guy. So flaws make it into the construction of these guys, but they only have one chance. You fail once and you're gone.
If you had one
shot.
opportunity,
yeah.
You better. Right on.
The interesting thing to me too is that we haven't really talked about it that much. We've kind of touched on it, but they have these crystals, these gems that are inside of them that are really giving them this animating force. Right.
You really locked onto this a lot more than I did. Like
I don't even remember the crystal at all. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I don't remember much.
The only reason I locked onto it was because they made a point of saying, the crematorians actually specifically, I think, say that when their rank and file burn up, the crystals remain. And the rest of them gather these crystals. And these crystals allow the essence of the soldier to be remade. So if you haven't failed, you can gather up these crystals, even if the body is destroyed, and go remake another body and remake that soldier, that warrior, into what they were before. And to me, that's a really interesting facet for an Age of Sigmar book to have. So it's just kind of like a, I don't know, off-topic idea, but everybody's been calling these guys Deathcast. And to me, they don't really read as Deathcast. They don't seem to have the same motivation, same idea. But what they do seem to be, for me, is this seems to be an AOS version of Death Space Marines. Where instead of having Gene Seed, you've got these gems. And you have these personalities that were created and tailored to make them into these ultimate killing machines. And once the body is destroyed, you can harvest what is the essence of them and remake it again. To the point where one of the legions is just called the 10,000, I think. And they just constantly remake them, but it's the same 10,000. And you're always going to fight the 10,000, and they're just going to always keep coming back. And I think that's where probably these messenger birds, etc., like, allows that to function in a more more complicated network, right? Like you don't have to actually walk all that way. You send the birds, you send like whatever, the travel. So that makes for a really interesting story and hook for me.
Sure. I get you. Phylactery gems.
Yes.
I had to look them up. Very cool. Any other points of interest before we talk about Black Library examples? All right, well, here we go. This is a very new army. It's tricky to find good examples of Black Library books that someone could read if they wanted to find out more about the Ossiarch Bonereapers. There's an obvious answer that I'm going to save for last, but I'm going to ask you guys, or you can bring it up too, if there are any books that we've read or that you've read in the Black Library series that you would recommend reading for folks who have a passing interest in the Ossiarch Bonereapers.
So basically, there's not, like you said, there's not a lot out there. If you want to get some of the, so both Nagash and Archon the Black are elements of this. You know, they exist in this book. They can be in here with the relevant keywords or whatever. A good book that talks about the interaction between those two, about this idea of Nagash having these long-standing plans and how he exists in multiple places at once is Soul Wars, a book that we tried to cover, and third time was not the charm.
And one of my favorite, like AOS books, which is such a shame.
With one of my favorite characters. Anyway,
totally agree.
But that is I'd call it a background book if you wanted to kind of bulk out your background on this faction.
Sure. All right, well then get ready for my sweet suggestions.
It's almost like we saved it for you.
I called dibs on it. Along the same lines to what Davy's saying in terms of getting some background on Death and Nagash as a whole. Man, Josh Reynolds does a really good job here. So he wrote Soul Wars, but then he also wrote the treatise on Nagash, literally the title of the book, Nagash, Undying King. And I think that's another example of getting some perspective on how Nagash operates. Less about like sort of his big plans, but maybe how he interacts with his Mortarchs, and I would like to think that maybe it would inform some of the relationship possibly between him and
it catches him at one of his low points, right? Like a lot of the book he's at is one of his low points as an existence. Like,
yeah. So it's at isn't it Age of Chaos where he's like he's at a
discorporated
low point.
Arcane's chopped him the once.
Exactly. But the obvious answer, folks, that we've been hemming and hawing about is A Tithe of Bone by Michael R. Fletcher is a short story. So sorry, you're just going to get a little tidbit here. But it came out relatively recently at the time of this recording. It's actually a Chaos Lord, but it's him going up against some Ossiarch Bonereapers. And having just read it myself, it's pretty interesting. It's a nice little taste. And if you want to hear us talk more about that, there is a Pocket Realms episode on it. But I'm sure you folks already know about that. But check it out if you want to read more about the Bonereapers. Some cool bone daddies. All right, let's get to our listener questions because, man, I'm sure the folks who've asked these questions are probably waiting with bated breath to see if we ask their questions. And surprise, we will. All right. If you want to get a question on the show, you can join our Discord channel and just be paying attention unannounced when I randomly ask for questions for recording.
When he demands that you dance for him.
Yeah, exactly. So basically you have to spend all your time in there just waiting ever so patiently for me to put the call out for questions. And these folks have. Good job. You guys win. First question from Koros, who's Scarbrand's daddy or something. I forget what his name is. He wants to know, what does Nagash intend to do with a disciplined force like that in the greater scheme of AOS? Do you guys have any thoughts? I think we maybe answered it a little bit earlier, but I'll see if we remain consistent.
So it feels like, Nagash is somebody, again, and this comes up somewhat in Soul Wars, where he is a god. He is incredibly powerful, but he has to split his consciousness in so many places. And so it's incredibly valuable to him to have an autonomous elite legion that can operate and achieve his goals without him having to stand and look over their shoulder all the time.
As much as he wants to.
Yeah. As much as he probably still will. They talk about he has the Morghast Archai, who are these guardians
that defend leaders in this, but also keep an eye on them. So if they start getting a little treacherous, then they bite the bullet. So, but I think this is his force that he can set and forget. Like let them go do their thing, and he can trust that they're going to accomplish his objectives without him having to provide what I assume is like already fairly spread thin for him to focus on all these different things.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that they provide is a stable, non-destroying force. Like, they're not going to fall apart, right? Once they're created, they have their own self-sustaining force. And not only do they have their own self-sustaining force, but they just start building massive fortresses and necropolises. Like, they're going to take over whatever is there. And if you don't tell them, they're just going to make it a base of power that rivals anything you can imagine, right? And then just continue to expand their influence. I mean, it basically would be like if you're playing World of Warcraft, or not World of Warcraft,
and I am.
Warcraft 3 or Warcraft 2, right? Like, you set it to go build and mine gold, and then you come back 8 hours later and like, oh, look at all this gold that I have. Like, it's very much like what it is like for him to be able to be like, go fix that. 150 years later, hey, you fixed it, great. Oh, you got all this stuff for me, cool. All right, I'll go do something else, right?
You're not playing a very capable opponent if you can come back eight hours later and you're just mining gold. No, I get it. These folks are not only the conquerors, but they're the builders. They're like Nighthaunt is very much a destructive force. You're not going to get anything like substantial out of the Nighthaunt. Whereas these folks they're gonna expand. They're gonna create the empire that Nagash so sorely wants. He's not just trying to destroy other civilizations, but he wants to create his own, and so like this is the mechanism by which he will do so. It's my take. Tomb King Tristan. Oh, sad. Does it? Because these aren't Tomb Kings, is what I'm saying. Does it make mention of the rebels in the text? You notice that on the death chart. He's talking about, I think,
the Shattered.
The Para. Yeah, so I think we covered them a little bit, or what was in the book. I think we chatted about. But he also wants to know: are there any juicy bits about lower level characters in the book? Honestly, the scribes and the attendants and the
soul
messengers
masons are pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and those as well. But like the attendants and their ilk for Catacross, I think are kind of glossed over, but they are referenced that like there are these people who serve a supporting and supplemental role to the army.
Well, and just imagine, because they are such a self-sustaining force, what if there was a force that was assigned to do something before Catacross was killed?
What if?
And never got recalled. Right? Like, there literally could be an entire civilization of them somewhere that just got forgotten, living on their own. And after 10,000 years of autonomy, what does that look like?
Sure. Do they... Actually, that's a great idea for an army, right? Or, I mean, or a story, but, like, yeah, like, do you... I mean, like, do they forget? Bones, like, do you remember, like, who Nagash even is?
Are you still collecting bones? What bones are you collecting? How have they changed who you are, right? Like...
That's true.
Yeah.
He's got other questions. With the combination of souls, are there multiple voices in their heads? I mean, I think for some, maybe not, maybe even all, I don't know, depending how many souls there are, of the Bone Reapers, that often does happen, or like a different soul may take priority over or a different component of a soul, maybe the more forceful component of a given like individual, and that will sort of take over.
Or maybe you'll just have that eternal screaming in your head for the eternity.
For some of that, actually, go ahead and read that Untitled the Bone that I mentioned, that short story, because it does touch on that concept for sure. And then, should forces like the Petrifex Elite be considered region-locked? AKA, do they mention forces that began in one realm traveling to another? I think a more example of that would be the Ivory Host.
But they did talk about that as well with Davy's favorite, where they're now the force that can go into that edge of the realm.
Sure.
Right?
I get the sense on these where they like consider these legions to have specialties, and they're willing to send them out to wherever that specialty is most needed.
Gotcha.
So I would not feel, if you have a legion that you really like, but you want it to exist in a different realm or something like that, I think you're all systems go.
Yeah. Well, and these were designed to be conquering forces, so they're gonna go out. Never dead. Ned, he asks, are the Reapers more an answer to Stormcast, or are they in the end Nagash's plan to fight chaos?
I don't think we could call them an answer to Stormcast because they were created before Stormcast were created.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So
I mean, before reading this Battletome, I would have said yes, they are. That's exactly what they are. But yeah, turns out no.
Yet.
And then in the end, Nagash's plan to fight chaos. I mean, they are part of his plan to fight chaos if Catacross is going into the Allgates.
Yeah, they're really going to their front door and knocking on.
Yeah. But I don't know if they were created for that end or,
Well, they were created before he really knew he needed to fight chaos.
Well, and they really are kind of the personification of Nagash, where they are this undying legion that does not require an animating force like the Death Rattle, right? Or, this emotion to carry them forward like the Nighthaunt. The Nighthaunt are very much about like their souls and revenge and all this kind of stuff, right? Like that's not what they are, and they're not about just this madness of crazed living that the
Flesh Eater
courts are, right? They really are the embodiment of his will, right? So
I think they'll get things done. Yeah, so I don't know that I would say their answer. I don't think they're the answer to Stormcast, nor do I necessarily think they're the plan to fight chaos specifically.
I just had a quick random thought. So there were Ossiarch Bonereapers that lived while Nagash was dead, and lived through that and lived forward, right? Like that's a super interesting concept, because the only other servants of death that we know are the Mortarchs. And the Mortarchs have lived that entire time, but these are individuals who have lived to see the death of their god and rebirth. So that's a really interesting, fascinating concept. And the death of their Mortarch and a rebirth.
They're pretty loyal to stick through all that. That's for sure. Our boy Josh, Fractal Rain, you can find more of him on the Dogs of War podcast. He wants to know, how long have the Ossiarch Bonereapers been around?
Since the age of myth.
Since the age of myth, for time immemorial.
Thanks for the softball, Josh.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. You knew what you were doing. It wasn't an accident. All right, let's wrap it up with a sweet review, or not sweet. I don't know. Maybe it's anti-sweet. Tell me what you thought about this here book.
So I enjoyed reading about a new faction. I loved having a death faction that had autonomy. We talked about this idea that it helped us enjoy the figures more. I mean, I guess you have Flesh Eater Courts have their own autonomy. I'm just not super hot on those figures. So this was the first death faction in a while that I could picture, being sort of invested in. And so I enjoyed that. My downside was that this read a little bit too much like a history book to me. I remember getting fantasy army books and feeling because I'm the way I am, I'm going to read this cover to cover. But sometimes you get in there and here's the history lesson. And, I'm just going to chug my way through this. And it felt like that a couple times here. That's not to say there weren't enjoyable elements to it, but that's where I ended up.
Yeah, so. I remember reading fantasy battletomes, and you're like, oh, I'm reading about what I kind of already know.
Sure.
I'm looking for those 3 paragraphs that are new and interesting, right?
And there's a little bit of that here, because we already know a lot about the Age of Myth and Age of Chaos. And there was some new stuff in there, so I appreciate that. And because of the new stuff in there, I'm going to give it 6.5 out of 9 books of Nagash.
Nice. I did enjoy it as well. It wasn't my favorite Battletome, but I did enjoy the story of Catacross. It was a cool story.
Sure.
I would have loved to have read it as a Black Library novel, because that seems like tailor-made. Living life, undeath, there's so much there. And what I really want to know is I want to have more exploration of the underworlds now. And there was some exploration of that in the Battletome, but the Battletome is not really the place to really do a deep dive into what it means to live in these underworlds, what it means to conquer other underworlds. So that seems like a very interesting topic to me. But as Davy said, I do have a much greater appreciation for the Force itself after reading all the background. But the main thing that I am going to take away from the Battletome has nothing to do with the words, has to do with those pictures and the gorgeous terrain.
Oh, the terrain.
That's just sitting in there that I want to see on the tabletop, and I'm never going to see on the tabletop, and it just drives me crazy. So, I mean, for better or for worse, like, that's the thing that really just, like, encapsulated the army to me. When they're talking about the Soul Masons building up these civilizations, and you see the pictures of those gorgeous fortifications and walls and towers, it sold the concept to me so much. And according to Facebook, that's not going to be a product that they're releasing. It's not going to be a thing. And it's just, so cool. So cool.
Bummer. From my perspective, honestly, man, whenever I'm reading a book that I'm not super stoked on, having these conversations makes me like it so much more. So honestly, anybody who reads Battletome who's listening, I recommend you start a podcast to review Battletomes, and then all of a sudden you'll start enjoying them a lot more, because it just tugs out all sorts of stuff that I hadn't really noticed. I think I wasn't super stoked on it, mainly for the reasons that Davy brings out, in that it did read sort of just like as a history lesson a lot of times. Catacross is cool in like sort of small chunks, but I feel like a lot of this book was dedicated to a story, which, like Paul said, I'm going to take both of what you guys said, I think would very much lend itself to a Black Library novel, unless the way it just sort of was written in this Battletome. Picture this. Catacross trilogy. First book, about his life. Second book, about his undeath, but not in the service of Nagath. Third book, he becomes the Mortarch, and he starts kicking butt and knocks down the door to the 8 points. I would read that trilogy. In fact, I think I just wrote that trilogy.
Yeah.
So
step aside, Josh
Reynolds.
Reynolds.
That trilogy.
Watch out. No, Josh Reynolds stepped aside a long time ago.
Friend of the show.
Friend of the show. Good friend. My best friend. So that wasn't doing it for me, but I think maybe I wasn't tugging out or focusing on the good parts as much as I should have. And that we did discover a handful of stuff. There was enough discovery being done in this book, or filling in holes in terms of stuff that we had experienced before, but maybe didn't know the whole story. I love that. I love having, bits of the map sort of filled in, whether it's a narrative map or an actual map. So that was pretty cool. And I don't know if I'll cut out what I said before, so I'll say it again here, but I like what this book sort of offers to the future. Like, this is a good foundational book, and hopefully it will make it a point where we can build off it. And I think this is a great starting point for what can be a pretty expansive and very interesting army, 5, 10, 15 years down the line. So I think it's a good place to start. And I look forward to see what they're able to do with the army in the future. That about sums it up. All right, cool. Do you guys have any other thoughts?
Negative.
Negatory. All right, well then here it goes. It's time for our reforging, but Sigmar willing, we'll be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, or leave a review. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar farther than we can on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter at The Mortal Realms. Davey, where can they find you?
You can be at red_Zeke, or for the What the Heck's cast at WTHcast.
Awesome. Paul, where can they find you?
At PJ Shard.
And I am at Dos Asos. And you can find all our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms.com. Did you see our new 4th podcast member?
I did. Speaking of new important things in people's lives.
That's more important than mine.
I just know you're never going to leave me.
I was going to say, you're so lucky you found me. Your allies through the roof. Nope, I needed to think a special one for this. Your allies through the... What are those streets called? Do they call them something special? The Bone Streets?
At www.themortalrealms.com.
No, you dummy. Bum, 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 bum.
Oh, boy. Have fun with that one.